So again, class, the liquidation process, alam naman natin to, it is the winding up of affairs, no, of the said business wherein the assets will be converted into cash. Realization po yun, then payment of the liabilities. Okay? So with regard to liquidation of individual debtor, okay, take note class, no, itong mga concept na ito. Yan. It may be voluntary or involuntary. So nag-move lang po yung ating notes, no? Kapag voluntary, it is the dead debtor, okay, who shall apply, no? Ayan. And it is the creditor who shall apply if in case of involuntary. Kapag ka naman status ng debtor ang tinatanong, insolvent po yung debtor, insolvent yung debtor. Kasi kung hindi po liquidation at suspension of payment na pinag-usapan, yung debtor ay solvent. The minimum amount is 500,000 and 500,000. Is there a bond required by the court to be filed or deposited? Ang sagot ay no kapag ka voluntary. Yes kapag ka involuntary. It's the creditor who shall file the bond. Yung liquidation order, kailan po ini-issue? It can be issued even without trial kapag ka voluntary. Pag involuntary, it must be after trial, proving na insolvent nga siya. Okay? Then, is there a requirement of presence of the debtor in case of the petition filed by the debtor himself? The answer is yes. Kaya nga, siya mismo yung nag-file. Pero pag creditor, no, hindi mo na kailangang dalhin si debtor na individual doon sa korte kapag nag-file ka ng petition for liquidation ng debtor. Okay, so yan po. Liquidation order. The court that has jurisdiction over liquidation proceedings shall in proper case issue a liquidation order or LO. Sabi natin kanina, ang liquidation order can be issued even without trial kapag ka voluntary. Kapag involuntary, it will only be issued after trial. And this includes, among others, declaring the debtor insolvent. So yung liquidation order, dinideclare niya na insolvency debtor, or ordering the liquidation of the debtor. Since insolvent ka na, i-liquidate mo na. Now, in case of juridical person, SPC, okay, SPC for purposes of this law, okay, declaring it as dissolved. Prohibiting payment and other transfer of property by the debtor. So, nagkakaroon ng standstill or stay order, directing all claims to be filed with the liquidator. This is in accordance with Section 112 of FRIA. Rights of secured creditors. The liquidation order shall not affect the right of secured creditor to enforce his lien or yung attachment, no, in accordance with applicable contract or law. So, na-maintain yung rights niya over the security or lien. However, the right is subject to temporary stay of foreclosure, meaning hindi mo pwedeng i-proceed yung foreclosure proceeding for a period of 180 days upon issuance of liquidation order by the court. Ulitin ko class ha. Okay, we have 90 days, 120 days, at saka 180 days. Yan po yung mga titingnan yung mga period. Yung 3 months, no? Okay, suspension order po yun. Standstill, 120 days. Ito naman, yung liquidation order upon issuance, okay, yung right of the secured creditor, meron siyang 180 days na temporary stoppage or stay of foreclosure. Pero, secured naman siya. If foreclose nga lang niya yung asset after 180 days, siguro probably after na mailatag na kung paano yung distribution ng asset. Distribution of asset, okay? Asset of the insolvent debtor shall be divided among the creditors in accordance with the liquidation plan submitted by the liquidator and approved by the court. Kaya po may period, no, stay of foreclosure period na 180 para mailatag muna yung liquidation plan. Then the rules on concurrence and preference of the credits under new civil code and other relevant laws shall be observed in the liquidation plan. Kaya dyan na po pumapasok yung mga secured creditors and unsecured creditors. And to summarize class, the proceedings covered by FRIA, baka ito tanungin sa board exam ninyo, no? Okay? Alin dyan ang covered sa SPC? Okay? Under FRIA, alin dyan ang covered for individual debtors kapag FRIA? Kapag individual debtors, okay, unahin na lang natin to. Suspension of payment and liquidation. So SL po ang acronym natin. Sa suspension of payment, only the solvent debtor can file a suspension of payment. The creditor cannot file, no? Sino ang pwedeng mag-file? Si debtor lang. Okay? Yan, it will be absurd class na si creditor ang magfa-file, no? Siya ang naniningil tapos magfa-file siya sa korte na ipatigil yung paniningil niya, di ba? Ipa-stop yung paniningil niya. Parang absurd naman 'yon, di ba? Wag ka na lang munang maningil, di ba? Kung ikaw yung creditor. So ayan. And liquidation, we have voluntary if the debtor will file and involuntary if the creditor will file. There's petition for action of insolvency. Ayan. For SPC or juridical person, we have here court-supervised rehabilitation or voluntary, out-of-court rehabilitation or involuntary, pre-negotiated rehabilitation, and voluntary liquidation and involuntary liquidation. So, ibig sabihin, kung may SL dito sa individual, ito naman RL. RL. Ayan. At kapag sinabi nating voluntary, there is no substantial likelihood of rehabilitation. Kapag involuntary, there is also no substantial likelihood of rehabilitation. Okay, kaya nga magli-liquidate. And the debtor is insolvent. Kaya yung mga requirement niya, insolvent yung debtor. Okay? Pero ang tanong lang, bakit naging voluntary? Because the insolvent debtor files for the petition. Involuntary naman because the creditor filed for the petition. Okay, so take note of that. Now, who will approve or file a petition? Kapag voluntary rehabilitation, it is the debtor. At kapag sole prop, yung owner ang mag-file. Kapag partnership, majority of the partners. Na-discuss na natin to mga kapatid. Kapag corporation, dalawa pong requirement, majority of the board of directors or okay, 2/3 vote of the outstanding capital stock or members. Okay, stockholders or members in case of stock corporation or non-stock corporation respectively. Who will approve or file a petition if involuntary rehabilitation? Pag involuntary, creditors. Okay? And for SPC, siyempre SPC lang naman ang may rehabilitation, juridical, hindi po pwede ang tinatawag natin na individual debtor, no? The creditor who has claim amounting to an aggregate amount of 1 million or 25% of the subscribed capital stock kapag corporation or contribution of the partners kapag ka-partnership, whichever is higher. So pinagpipilian po natin ay yung creditors, okay, na may claim na 1 million, okay, or 25%. Ayan na, 25% of the subscribed capital stock kung corporation or contribution of the partner kung partnership or syempre yung asset ng sole prop, whichever is higher. Yan. Okay. Ano tong ID? 500 at SOP and SPC 1,000, 1 million. 500,000 kapag individual debtor at ito po ay for the liquidation, no? Liquidation. Kapag suspension of payment, there is no amount. Okay? Minimum amount. Kapag SPC or juridical person, ito na po, 1 million or 25%, whichever is higher. Who will file or approve in a pre-negotiated rehabilitation plan? Pag pre-negotiated class, ito po ay agreed between the debtor and creditor and confirmed by the court. Okay? So the debtor will present the rehabilitation plan, okay, and the creditor will approve the said plan and the needed or required approval, okay, is 2/3 of the total liability, of which more than 50% should be secured obligation and more than 50% unsecured obligation. Represented by unsecured obligation. So, ibig sabihin, hindi necessary na 100%. So, pag pre-negotiated, 50-50 and more than at least 2/3 of the total liability. Okay? And present to the court for confirmation. Kapag out of court rehabilitation plan, there is no confirmation requirement. And remember these percentages, 67, 75, and 85%. Na-discuss na natin to kanina. Okay? Who will approve or file for petition if voluntary liquidation? It is the debtor. Basta voluntary class debtor. Okay? And in a sole prop partnership and corporation, okay, take note ng sole prop, again, the owner or the proprietor. Kapag partnership, majority of the partners. Kapag ka-corporation, majority of the board and 2/3 of the OCS or the members kapag ka non-stock corporation. Who will approve or file a petition in case of involuntary? So pag nakita niyo involuntary, creditors. Okay? Ngayon, for sole prop, partnership, and corporation, ang minimum ay 3, 3 or more creditors. Pag liquidation na, liquidation, 3 pong creditor na may aggregate claim of 1 million or 25% of the subscribed capital stock or the contribution of the partnership, whichever is higher. Yan. Okay, 1 million or 25%. So sila po yung allowed na mag-file ng petition for involuntary liquidation. Who will approve or file a petition if suspension of payment po ang fina-file? Only individual debtor. Hindi pwede ang tinatawag nating juridical. For individual debtor, when the obligation will fall due. So there is no minimum amount of debt and the debtor is not insolvent. Ibig sabihin, solvent po siya as a requirement. Who will approve or file for petition in a voluntary liquidation? It is the debtor. And the individual debtor must have a minimum obligation of 500,000. Okay? So pang individual debtor yan, class ha? Pero kapag juridical, 1 million or 25% of the subscribed capital stock or contribution of the partnership, whichever is higher. Who will file or approve a petition in involuntary liquidation? It's the creditor with claim of minimum of 500,000. That is for individual debtor. So to summarize, kapag individual debtor, suspension of payment, the debtor will file, wala pong minimum amount. Voluntary liquidation, the debtor will file 500,000 ang minimum na obligation. In voluntary liquidation, the creditor will file 500,000 ang minimum na obligation. Difference between suspension of payment and liquidation. Okay? So dito, class, sa suspension of payment, the debtor is solvent. Yes. Kapag liquidation, dito ko ilagay yung liquidation, no? No, hindi po siya solvent. The debtor is insolvent. Yan. The principal obligation kapag ka-suspension of payment ay stayed. Kapag ka naman liquidation, discharged na po yung obligation. And who will apply for the suspension of payment? Only the insolvent debtor. Okay? Or the individual debtor. Yan, natural person. Pero pag liquidation, pwede pong juridical at pwede rin pong individual. And who among the parties ang magpa-file? Kapag suspension, only the debtor. Hindi pwedeng creditor ang magpa-suspend ng payment. But for liquidation, kapag voluntary, debtor. Kapag involuntary, creditor. Minimum amount, okay? Meron po tayo minimum amount. We have here 500,000 for suspension of payment. Okay? O kaya naman, for liquidation, we have here, 500,000 or 1 million, okay, for liquidation, but for suspension of payment, there is no minimum amount. Yan. Difference between suspension of payment and rehabilitation. So suspension of payment, individual debtor, rehab, juridical. Who shall file? Okay, it is the debtor who will file kapag suspension. Kapag ka-rehab, debtor or creditor. Okay, the debtor in this case, suspension is solvent. Kapag rehab naman ay insolvent. Minimum amount sa suspension, wala po, none. Pero kapag rehabilitation, 1 million or 25% of the subscribed capital stock or the contribution of the partners, whichever is higher. Ayan po. Difference between voluntary liquidation and involuntary liquidation of an individual debtor. I-highlight natin individual. Who shall file? Okay? The debtor, kapag ka-voluntary, involuntary creditor. Minimum is 500,000, 500,000. The debtor is insolvent sa liquidation. Kaya insolvent din siya dito. Yan. Is there a bond required to be deposited? No kapag voluntary. Yes kapag ka involuntary. Is there a need for the debtor to be present in filing? Yes, kasi nga voluntary. No naman kapag involuntary. And is the liquidation order required will be issued when? Okay, it will be issued even without trial kapag voluntary. After trial naman kapag involuntary. Difference between involuntary liquidation of individual versus business organization. So, class, last na po ito. Kapag individual, okay, ang creditor ay dapat at least one. Okay? At ang amount na minimum ay 500,000. Yun yung sinisingil niya. Pag judicial or juridical, 3 or more. At ang minimum amount ay 1 million or 25% of the subscribed capital stock or the contribution of the partnership, whichever is higher. Okay, and this ends our discussion with regard to FRIA.